And we are live. Welcome everyone to today's event where we have Anna Grouverman, Group Product Manager at Spotify, joining us to talk about sparking innovation. I'm Mirella, together with Anil and Victoria. We co-organize these weekly product meetups, which you can find on our meetup group, but also see recordings on the YouTube channel, which some of you may be viewing this right now. So hey everyone, and I think the best way to introduce Anna is to let Anna introduce herself, so you can take over from here.
Perfect. Since it's 2020, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, seeing some thumbs up. So I will get going. Hello, my name is Anna. I am very excited to be here speaking to all of you. And I will, as already mentioned, be talking about sparking innovation for product. So I am planning to talk for about 20 minutes. Since this is me, there is always a chance I will talk for a little bit longer. But then I'm really looking forward to maybe questions and discussion with all of you as well. So with that, oh my goodness, I did not check. Aha. I clicked an arrow and it did not switch slides, but now I figured it out. So currently, just to start with what I'm working on these days, I am a group product manager at Spotify, which means that I lead a group of PMs and in total a team of about 60 people, which includes engineering, design, etc., researchers, of course. And we are part of a tribe called Core Experience, within which we actually own and innovate on some of the most touched surfaces and features in the Spotify mobile app. Some of these you'll probably recognize are your library, very popular with our tenured users and our super users, a very loved feature. And actually, those that have been with the product long enough can probably remember a version of Spotify that was mostly just the library. We also own playlists end to end, which means we own the infrastructure that all playlists at Spotify operate on, that enables them to be streamed by our users. And also, we own the curation flow for user playlists and the UX for user playlists. And finally, something I'm very excited about is we own a new feature called Group Sessions that launched just recently. And so basically, it is one of Spotify's first forays into having a shared queue and enabling users to listen to the same tracks together and to control together what they're listening to on different devices. The update we just rolled out recently is enabling this for remote. So you no longer have to be in the same place, but you can still have a shared queue and have a jam session with your friends, which we hope is really, really handy for these COVID times when a lot of us can't travel and cannot be, for safety reasons, close in the same geographic proximity. With a lot of our friends and loved ones. So it's really something we're very proud of and something that we're spending a lot of time innovating on. So another thing I wanted to chat about was just to outline very briefly my career trajectory as a PM, because it actually has not been a completely straight and obvious road. So I started out majoring in international politics in undergrad in Washington, D.C., and actually spent 4 years at the School of Foreign Service, which kind of ironically was known on campus as safe from science. So after high school, I studiously avoided everything that had to do with numbers and kind of the hard sciences, considered myself very much a word person, which I still do, but I've now just come to realize there's more dimensions to that. And then I moved into management consulting after I realized that my dream job in undergrad, which I thought would be, some sort of lawyer in the United Nations preventing wars, was actually not a real job. So I started working at Accenture, spent 2 years there doing strategy consulting for private sector companies, primarily Fortune 500, and then moved to Deloitte to do some actually energy and sustainability consulting for the US federal government. And after that, through a series of kind of very serendipitous events, I ended up at Google working on the Google Docs team. So I started out on the Google Spreadsheets team, then eventually worked across Google Docs and Drive. And towards the end of my almost 7 years there, I was working across the entire Google Apps suite, which includes things like Calendar, Gmail, Drive, Docs, a lot of very well-loved features at Google. And then I took a step back from the tech industry, and I believe this is a very healthy thing to do. Obviously, first of all, I did it, and people tend to advocate for things they did themselves. But I wanted to do something related but different. So I went and got a graduate degree at Oxford and studied at the Oxford Internet Institute. So looking at kind of the sociology of digital spaces. Thinking about the tech industry from afar or from close up, but not being a part of it for a few years. And after that, I moved over to Spotify. So that's where I am today. And with that, I'll begin the actual meat of my talk. I came up with the title and the topic sort of before I knew exactly what I wanted to say, because it's simply something I spend a lot of time thinking about as the lead of a team of product managers. As product people, we're obviously challenged constantly to innovate and disrupt and change and launch. So it's a hot topic. But at the same time, when I kind of picked apart the title of my talk, I realized innovation is a really abused word. It gets bandied about for pretty much any sort of change, just like the word strategy. Whenever people feel insecure or uncertain about the future, they pull up two things. Let's do a strategy and let's innovate. So I wanted to take a step back and kind of think about very original, very core definitions of innovation before diving in. And I came up with a few here that really stuck out to me. So there's turning opportunity into new ideas. There's transforming ideas into new and improved products. And then there's the very pithy and to the point creativity with a job to do. And you'll see, although the definitions themselves are pretty different, there's actually some really recurring common themes, primarily that there is an element of ideas, there is an element of novelty, and there's an element of the thing being used. So it's not just ideas for the sake of it, it's not fiction literature, it is actually taking something from the idea stage and making it available to users, for example. Now, at the same time, during this time, I was realizing what I really wanted to say in this talk, and I took a step back and thought about what product people spend their time doing. Everything from setting the vision for a product, so deciding what the perfect end state would be for the thing that we're designing, to creating the strategy for how we will achieve that vision, how we will get there over time, what we'll need to do, what our definitions of success will be, how we will know that we've gotten there. Actually executing on that strategy. So working really closely with our partners in design and technology and product insights. And finally, after launch, iterating on what we've created and continuing to make it better, making sure that it's timely, etc. Of course, innovation can apply to all of these phases. I mean, we innovate all the time on a daily basis when we face issues in execution, for instance. So if you think about you have a roadmap and you have a timeline, there's something you want to achieve, and then you run into this pesky thing called feasibility, and you have to go back to the drawing board with your cross-functional partners and reevaluate what is really important. Same with iterating. There's innovation that happens hopefully all the time, but I really want to focus on the vision and strategy elements. And this can apply at any point in the product life cycle, whether it's something completely new, you have your own startup idea, and you want to make it real, and you want to kind of really go from genesis of idea to something more concrete that you can start working towards, or an existing product, something more mature, similar to Spotify, where we clearly know what Spotify does, but we still want to provide novelty and we want to provide usability to our users and we want to stay relevant and we want to give something to the world that is different from what has been done before. So I'll cover the rest of this talk with a focus on the vision and strategy aspects. But of course, in questions, I'm happy to address innovation, any of these other phases as well. So with that, we decided that ideas are a huge part of innovation. And so obviously, if you're thinking about particularly a team that is thinking through product questions, where do new ideas come from? I spent some time kind of as a classic PM, basically brainstorming with myself, and essentially landed on the fact that there is a spectrum. There are some very internal things that tend to be somewhat individual and come from almost within oneself, being inspired, having an intuition that something might be an idea worth pursuing. And there's very external things. So, business need, the fact that, for instance, we might want to drive consumption for a product, and currently consumption is not quite what we know it should be in order for us to deliver ultimate value to the market and to our users. There's also user needs, spoken and unspoken. And then there's things that are kind of in the middle. So if you look at market trends, for example, could be something that a lot of your competitors are doing, but you sort of choose whether or not you want to follow it. And similar for new opportunities. Um, so with that, kind of thinking about the spectrum, I thought that the most relevant thing to do would probably be to go through the core things that in my experience I've found to be useful for each of these parameters and kind of staying creative and staying innovative in order to pursue each of these and make them generate value for your team. So the first is business needs. It's the ultimate external thing. And it often, especially when we're earlier in our careers, assuming we're not a startup founder, they're brought to us from elsewhere. There might be a CEO or a CPO who is the most aware in the business of what needs to happen, and or at least perhaps it's not the complete right answer, but they're in charge of setting goals and saying, as an example, we're going to drive consumption this year, and that is our focus. Now, product managers occupy a really interesting space where we're expected to straddle both business and product and tech and kind of act as the glue between a lot of the different functions that come together in order to provide something to users and customers. So the primary thing here is PMs have to take the business needs they're hearing about and being told about and being asked to pursue and paint the picture of what those needs are and why we're pursuing them and what that means for the specific teams they lead. So, a huge part of innovation comes simply from providing context and explaining what goals are, but also why are those goals on the table at all? How do they connect with the features we handle every day? It is very easy to get caught up in iterating on features and not keeping in mind why we're trying to make them better. that leads to really poor prioritization. And in order to keep a team innovative and edgy, you really have to provide the context of what the business needs. There's also user needs, and users are excellent at keeping us on our toes and keeping us informed of what innovation would look like for them, theoretically. But this is actually a really tricky area because, as I mentioned earlier, there are spoken user needs, such as user feedback. And then there are unspoken needs that we discern from data about how our product is being used right now, perhaps market research, perhaps interviews with what we believe the target customer group should be, etc. At the same time, there is a lot of balancing that has to happen within this. First of all, concatenating qualitative and quantitative data. There's a lot of different theories on this. I could easily speak for an hour just about this topic. But if I had to summarize, being able to leverage each data type for the maximum value that it can provide. Perhaps something like looking at your data that is quantitative and using qualitative data to contextualize it and provide the why. That's just an example. Another thing is obviously being able to listen to the spoken user needs without failing to hear the why behind those. A lot of times users will say what they think they need, but actually they're expressing a completely different form of angst than what they're saying. So they might be saying, as Henry Ford allegedly famously said, I need a faster horse. But what they actually need is the automobile. So there's a lot of risk in, as I tried to picture here, breaking user hearts if we fail to see the full picture and embrace the complete holistic context of the user need being expressed. Now, how does that tie into innovation? Well, that's what keeps us moving forward. So understanding what areas of user need we've not fulfilled yet, and going from there to generate ideas about how to do so. Market trends. In essence, the biggest advice here is doing your research. But the really interesting thing here is it's a very broad topic. So obviously user needs and how user expectations shift as a result of what our competitors do are a huge source of open questions and hopefully the kind of productive anxiety that causes teams to come together and do a workshop and make some sort of new solution. There is also just looking at competitors in a really simple way. I really encourage here looking at direct competitors. So companies doing the same thing, apps doing the same thing, but also looking at adjacent competitors. So looking at where users might be fulfilling a similar need with a different kind of product. And finally, just thinking about general trends in the market, general broad attitudes that users might embrace in 2 years that they're not embracing right now, and how you're able to anticipate that. New opportunities is incredibly broad. Again, an entire talk on innovation could just be focused on opportunity seizing. But if we really think about what new opportunities might be, first of all, it could be that new technology is becoming increasingly available and feasible for your kind of company to leverage. I think machine learning is a great example of this because it used to be really expensive and really hard, and now almost every company you talk to is doing something with it. It may still be at this stage, usually statistics on steroids. However, it shows how something making its way closer to the mainstream allows for new opportunities for new products. Another thing might be how your team is evolving in terms of the skills that you have available at your disposal. Perhaps your team has just grown, so you have more people. Perhaps you have hired a different type of engineer, or different type of product manager. But in essence, what I'm getting at here is new opportunities come from all corners. So, this of all the categories is where PMs have to stay incredibly open to cross functional collaboration. Without asking questions of our technical counterparts, we simply will not know what the new technologies are that are becoming available and feasible for our teams to leverage. Similar with design, without asking questions and being really open to guidance, we will not know how shifting user expectations are making us more able to build a product that fulfills perhaps a user need we didn't used to be able to fulfill, but now we can. So, this is where discussion, asking questions, and not being sort of a closed minded PM that believes they have all the answers is paramount to keep innovation top of mind in your team and company. Also, similarly, relatedly, but very differently, more of an internal thing that we tend to attribute to individuals kind of going for a long walk by themselves is inspiration. And there's plenty of excellent books that have been written about seeking inspiration and kind of injecting creativity into your own thinking. I will not attempt to paraphrase all those great thinkers that have spent a lot of time on this, but some of the core things I wanted to share today is, to me, there's basically two big sources. There's books and other written and kind of ready made off the shelf material. And then there's people. So, reading books is a huge source of inspiration and innovation because every time you encounter something new, there's a chance that a thought will lead you towards a new idea, either for a problem you were already trying to solve or uh, in a completely new direction. And on the people side, it goes back to that cross functional work and open mindedness and making sure that everyone on your team is equally inspired and enabled and empowered to bring ideas to the table. Simply, when we don't do this, when we don't create the kind of safe environment where anyone who happens to have thought up something great feels like they can come to the table or walk into the room and tell everyone about it and be heard, we lose a huge portion of what the talent we have on our team can bring. So here I say avoid dictation in the sense that avoid being the product manager that dictates what the answers are. Avoid sort of strolling into the conference room and saying, we need to build X. If you're saying that, try to make that as open-ended as you can in the early stages of ideation. And that's how you will probably leverage the innovation of far more people on your team and end up with a much better solution than if you started and just did this on your own after reading a book and stayed in a corner with a whiteboard until you had the entire vision in place. And finally, intuition. A really interesting one because as product people, when we spend time on a problem, and particularly when we become intimately familiar with a product by working on it for a really long time, we develop intuition about what the product needs. So, keeping in mind all the things I've already said, trying not to be dictatorial, looking at the data, looking at external sources of inspiration and information. I would say the core piece of advice I can give here is sometimes dare to be wrong. Dare to go against what the data says and believe that the intuition that is speaking inside you, hopefully once verified and sanity checked with a lot of people on your team, particularly those that are not perhaps working in the product function, but have a very different perspective from yourself, try to follow that. Enable and empower yourself as well to sometimes do the unexpected. And again, the word disruption is just wildly overused in the industry at this time. But if we had to use it, this is where it comes from. It's a lot of decisions that are made, sometimes in a less obvious way, and based on the sheer amount of experience and information we've already gathered that our brains automatically concatenate and triangulate in some way that yields a really good idea to pursue. So with that, I'm speaking and I suspect I'm making it sound somewhat easy. Let's be honest and admit that we're in 2020 and a lot of us are working remotely and working from home. So, assuming we follow all of this advice, it can still get very, very difficult to stay innovative during this time where obviously there's added stress. There's the absence of conference rooms we can stroll into. It's harder to catch colleagues to ask them questions and get their perspective. So just kind of being honest about that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time with some of the things that I've seen work despite this special circumstance we're all in. First of all, holding virtual brainstorms and design workshops can actually work reasonably well. It's certainly not for everybody, and I certainly recommend sort of changing how this is done, given that a lot of us are in a lot of virtual meetings all the time and that the virtual environment is different. But don't write this off. This can still be an option for your team to ideate. To the point about reading books and seeking inspiration, kind of ready-made off-the-shelf material, share reading materials and podcasts. So try to see if the same ideas that stick out to you stick out to someone else, or perhaps when they read or hear the exact same thing that inspired you, they will have a completely different takeaway. And then there's an opportunity to discuss. Keep posing questions, keep avoiding dictation. This is still not a time for PMs to, walk off the mountain and have the treatise of how all the problems must be solved. And make extra time to reflect. Try to go screen free. Screens are notoriously distracting. Also make time for people and continue to invest in building relationships so that people on the team that you manage, the teams that you work with, still feel safe and empowered to come to you with an idea or to come to you with a solution to a problem that you've been discussing together. And finally, try to reduce the administrative burden. This can seem contradictory to, keep meeting with people and distribute reading materials and hold virtual brainstorms, but acknowledge that there are certain ways that people work, and having a lot of overhead, a lot of meetings per day, a lot of screen time per day can simply sap the individual internal sources of inspiration out of your team, sometimes entirely. So kind of try to stay empathetic as well. And hopefully that can yield really good results for you and your team. And with that, I am interested in hearing what you all thought and what came to mind for all of you.
This was great, Anna. Thanks a lot. So everyone who likes to have a question, you can post it here in the chat. And for the people watching on YouTube, I'm going to transfer the questions to Anna.
So Anna, first of all, thank you for the presentation and congrats for your words studies. That's probably very helpful now because you don't need someone on content to support you with content creation, right?
Not entirely true. So we do still have professionals create content rather than our product people.
I have also another question, if I may. That was not really a question. How do you, let me give you some context first. Imagine you have this company that is built upon a platform, just like Spotify. And let's say the platform grows in terms of functionalities and areas where you as a PM can have an impact. But you get to a point where the PM team grows faster than the area where you can impact, and especially since the platform is reaching some maturity, like Spotify. How do you prevent building stuff just for the sake of building and keeping the development team busy, and actually build valuable, innovative stuff and not be forced by the fact that you just have to have something to work on, which is not really innovation and not really valuable?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting and big question. Obviously, I can't solve it during this talk, but I can give some sort of thoughts and maybe tips that hopefully might be useful. At a high level, obviously the answer is prioritization, but I suspect you already knew that. So in an ideal scenario, sort of if we look at kind of biblical, canonical perspectives on OKRs and roadmap planning, nothing gets worked on, nothing gets built that is not aligned with the strategy, and the strategy is perfectly aligned with the vision. So it should be completely avoidable. But we all know that that is not the truth on the ground, and that life tends not to follow these canonical rules. So one thing I would encourage actually all product people to think about is what kind of organization you're in, because that can radically shift the way decisions are made and the way prioritization is done. Are you in a product-led organization, which will tend to be a little bit more businessy, a little bit more basically product-driven and very interested in having a vision and a strategy, and then everything kind of waterfalling almost from there? Versus, for instance, a more tech-led organization where it can be harder for a product person to insert themselves, which is often sort of the intrinsic feeling we get about why is this happening, why is this being built, and how can I make it efficient, how can I help, how can I improve it. Or design-led organizations, you know, also a different type of animal. But it sounds like at some point, you know, things are being built just because they're exciting for developers. Some decisions were made where there was likely a miscommunication or poor distribution of information, because I would argue that few things get built just because someone wants to have fun. I mean, I that would be a very courageous person that just starts, you know, building a company infrastructure because they want to solve a fun coding problem. I think people like that, when they have a really great idea, they usually start their own companies. Probably there's a lack of information about why this is being built. Maybe there are side benefits. So the core thing itself is not going to be usable for a product, for UX, for front end, but it's some sort of innovation on the technical level on the platform that will yield benefits down the road, and it's a longer term investment. Or maybe the strategy and vision part from the product side have not been communicated well enough that this looks unrelated now, but when it started, perhaps the people that started it thought it was aligned and a good idea. So what I would encourage is sort of giving everyone the benefit of the doubt and then having these conversations on an ongoing basis, because I've seen it happen that something that starts in alignment with vision and strategy and kind of product intent can spiral off and start a life of its own. And then often, even if it's fun coding problems on the ground, you know, the developers working on it end up being frustrated as well, because, you know, maybe it's fun to code, but where is this ever going? And how is it useful to anyone? I think most people want to see their work kind of contribute to the greater whole in the end. I hope that helps.
All right, so we have a lot of messages in the chat. Should we take them historically? All right, so from Slavomir, how do you view competition from YouTube Music? Straight to the point.
Competition from what? I'm sorry.
From YouTube Music. And if you think they are trying to copy you.
So I should say here, I should have said at the beginning, I'm here representing my own personal views and my personal expertise rather than Spotify. So I have to demur on that, but I will say, because this is very public information, one doesn't have to work at Spotify to know this. We're operating in a market where there is a lot of really great players, frankly. And that's not an intended pun, but it actually works both ways. There's a lot of really great ways to listen to music, and there are a lot of companies playing in this space. So, in terms of copying, I think what users tend to notice is similar user experience. And what happens is when you have a marketplace where, there's a lot of players trying to help users do the same thing, certain best practices develop. They just can't help but develop because the thing is, users have expectations and we're all listening to user feedback. And this applies to all industries. So there end up being some unspoken almost standards. And that's a really interesting moment to think about innovation because we can all chase each other endlessly and copy and replicate and improve incrementally. And the challenge is really in how do I pretend that this is a complete green field for a minute and do something new and unexpected that still fulfills the needs that users have, but perhaps in a very new way, perhaps hopefully in a better way. And that's what innovation is all about. And I'm sure all of us in all of these companies providing streaming right now are thinking about that. And not just for competitive purposes either, also simply to bring something better to the world.
Cool, this is a very good answer. And I also like a lot this point of view of, okay, if this was a greenfield, how we do it differently, to not get kind of in this sunken cost mentality. Oh, we've invested in these, hence we should invest more, even if we're not so sure.
Exactly.
This is great. All right, so I'll take one comment from YouTube as well. From Birte Lokel, I hope I'm not butchering your name that badly. What kind of formats are you using to encourage PM to exchange knowledge and give feedback to each other?
Mm-hmm. This is a really good question as well, because product roles can be somewhat lonely in the sense that you often have a fairly large even team of developers working together. There may be more than one designer, but also just from what I've observed, design as a discipline tends to be driven by best practices. So there's a lot of knowledge sharing and usually a sense of community, both internally in the company and externally in the world. And PMs, when we start our job, we're told you're the CEO of this feature or this product. And there's a sense of, well, I'm dealing with perhaps very different problems, at least while they're concrete. And I'm not partnered with other PMs, perhaps. It's, me, a lot of developers, several designers, several researchers, etc. So it is really important to continue sharing PM knowledge. And it's not always done well in all organizations. Some of the things that I've seen work very well is obviously meetings, team meetings for PMs are underrated, I think, and how useful they can be when they're executed well. Because often, like I said, you can break down what we do into some very replicable parts. Regardless of the product itself, we're all trying to set a vision, set a strategy, oversee execution and lead execution, iterate on the product, measure success. Even if on the ground, the granular detail is very, very different, we can share how we did one thing or the other, and it can be useful to others. I cannot emphasize enough how much reading books is useful for me personally, listening to podcasts. And here you could almost also say it's directly related and then adjacently related are both relevant. So listening to, for instance, interesting industry stories that are not specifically product management focused. And then sharing that to my PM team, my peers in Spotify, others that I think find it interesting. That's a great way to build a shared know-how in an organization. And another thing is actually conferences. I think, again, this is something that for some reason I have not seen be as powerful in the world product community as it could be, in my opinion. But virtually or in person, going to meetups, going to events, going to kind of Q&A sessions and just discussing stuff. Because again, finding that commonality between all the different kinds of products that we work on is really valuable for developing best practices and helping get us unstuck from, this CEO mentality of it's me against all of my problems that I'm trying to solve this week.
I have one question, if I may ask.
Of course.
Yes, about the competitors, I mean, considering that we are working in the market that normally competitors copy the features from one to another, and what do you think in this environment, how you define your unique value proposition and how to build it? Because I mean, in tech world, it's easy to copy and paste features and deliver it to customers, but you may lose customers within one day because other competitors will deliver the same service with a smaller price, right? So how do you see this issue, and how do you define your value proposition? Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the short answer is stay innovative and try to think about user needs rather than user tasks. So, there's a great book about jobs to be done for users. It's a way to take a step back from what we believe users are trying to do and to think about the intrinsic, almost emotional level need that they're trying to fulfill. So, and this can be very fuzzy, like for streaming music, you could go in a lot of different directions. You could say, is it to shift my own mood because, I'm so excited I got home after this great talk I gave, but now it's almost time to sleep. So I will turn on something that will put me in that mood. Or is it because I want to connect to people? And so I want to listen to things that remind me of something with my friends. Like there is a lot of different intrinsic emotional needs or so-called jobs that users might have. But to my earlier point, if you kind of take a step back and imagine there's just this job to be done, there's just this green field around me, how might I do it? And keep forcing yourself to do that over and over. Because, if you don't, someone else will. And then the other thing that I heard in your question is this idea that you might lose customers very fast. Well, of course, I think, though, that to some extent boils down to, are my competitors going to innovate better than me? The thing is, the game isn't over until the business closes, right? So, and even then, you can go and start your own thing. So basically, they might innovate better tomorrow, but then what about the day after that? Beyond copying, how can you assess what they've done, why a lot of customers went to them because of it, and then try to leverage sort of that underlying context or truth in a new and different way. And I'm afraid that there's not a perfect answer to this because, again, it's such a big question, and there's a reason there's business academic articles and all sorts of books about innovation and disruption. And of course, everyone is trying to do it. But I think from all of that, from that morass of information, hopefully you can glean on an ongoing basis things that sort of keep you going and keep you staying positive. Even if right now you are not ahead, you might be a little bit later. Customers will come back. if you give them something that they really, really need and they really want. And word of mouth even is a powerful thing. So it's not always about costs. It's not always about marketing prowess or brand.
Okay, so may I rephrase what I understood from your answer? So it's a combination of user needs and emotional component of it, plus prediction of future needs that we can call innovation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it can be the formula for.
Oh, formula is tricky.
Okay. Thank you so much.
But I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that's that is the main two things I was naming.
Thank you so much.
Cool. One more ask, because we are now over the Q&A session and we can continue. I skipped a few questions that were mentioned in the company directly. One last one, which I also think is interesting, from Jitka Moreira commenting on YouTube. Would you recommend some interesting sources of podcasts or specific podcasts that you've enjoyed?
Absolutely. So an interesting source is this company I know called Spotify. So basically what I do is podcasts are interesting because it's kind of like, it's this brilliant way of being just spoon-fed information. And at the same time, it can feel like you're talking to a friend or you're hearing it in a stimulating conversation. And especially in these dire times when so many of us are being asked to socialize less, for an extrovert like myself, they've become a real refuge. So a few recommendations. I could, go on and on here, but I find the Artificial Intelligence podcast by Lex Friedman to be really interesting. And that one basically talks about AI, but it covers such a broad spread of guests, and that's what I love the most. So there's academics, there's kind of business people, and it helps me personally. I have a really strong interest in this space to think about AI from really different dimensions. And the other one would be Acquired, which is a podcast about, I'm not affiliated in any way, so this is very much my synopsis, but it's basically about the stories of big acquisitions in the tech industry, with some really interesting episodes on companies like Netflix and TikTok. And I've been really enjoying those.
Cool. Thank you so much for the recommendations. So the people watching on YouTube, I've posted the link to the Zoom if you want to join for the breakout session. Thank you so much, Anna. And for everyone, feel free to join our next talk next Tuesday or the Tuesday from now on. So we have them planned throughout the summer. And now this will be the end of our live stream.